Hello, I'm your host, Bethany Barber, Executive Director of the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association, and I'm so happy you could join us for a new episode of the Domino Effect, where our local nonprofit organization will sit with government officials to discuss issues pressing that are affecting our community. In this episode, the Legal Aid Society and Orange County District 6 Commissioner Michael Scott will have a discussion on housing law, general legal aid society services, and engagement with law enforcement. Perpetual goodness goes a long way, and every person, company, and organization has the ability to positively impact Orange County's residents, making Central Florida a better place for all. We each have a responsibility to lend a helping hand when possible, continuing the cycle of growth and improvement in our communities. It's the Domino Effect.
Hello, I'm Larry Thatcher, Deputy Director and Staff Attorney at the Legal Aid Society of the Orange County Bar Association. Thank you, Commissioner Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Larry.
I understand that you're getting a lot of questions from constituents in your district about civil legal issues.
Yeah, so people have issues, whether it's maintenance or what to do if there's a concern and they don't know how to address it legally with a landlord who may not be following all the rules. And so it's good to have a resource like the Legal Aid Society or any organization to be able to kind of say, this is what this means, kind of breaking it down for them.
Excellent. And yes, we are a great resource for the community. So let me go through real quick some of the kinds of civil legal assistance we handle at the Legal Aid Society. And you mentioned landlords, and that is a big one. We do housing, and our focus in housing is on foreclosure and tenants' rights. And particularly in the tenants' rights, there's a whole range of things that we can help tenants with. From the I'm being evicted to there's substandard conditions and the landlord won't make repairs,
Right.
to the landlord won't renew my lease. What do I do? What are my rights? My landlord is raising my rent. And now we have the Orange County Office of Tenant Services.
Excited about that.
Yes, me too, right? And we are partnering up with them. And so we are really going to get in there and figure out what kinds of issues tenants in your district are having and how we can help them.
Yeah.
Some of the other areas we do family law. Our primary focus is on survivors of domestic violence in their divorce, custody, injunction for protection issues. Consumer, if somebody's facing debt collection or needs to file bankruptcy, we will take a look at it, let them know what their options are, what their best course of action is. We do immigration for folks who are already here in Central Florida. And again, there we're primarily focused on victims of violence and crime in the U.S. and children's legal issues. We do sealing and expunction of Florida records if the record was a Florida state charge and it happened locally. We also are a VITA. We're a free VITA tax site. We're a free tax service for low-income taxpayers.
That's good.
With their simple taxes. And then we do some specialty services for veterans. We do things like wills and power of attorney and healthcare surrogates for our veterans. And we partner with the VA to go out on site and reach veterans out there. And then we also we do some specific services for seniors.
Right.
And we partner with Seniors First and the Senior Resource Alliance to do things like grandparents raising grandchildren and what kinds of legal issues that surround that, and some limited other kinds of issues for seniors.
I think it's great. Like when I think of your organization, a lot of people say, oh, I need a free attorney, and it's so much more than that. Sometimes people just need to know, what do I do or where do I go? Like even in an instance when we were talking about housing, a lot of folks don't know that if a landlord doesn't fix something, that you have to, actually give them notice that you're not going to pay rent, and in writing say, hey, look, I'm not going to pay rent if you don't fix this, this, and this. And so a lot of times they fall victim to a potential eviction for no other reason than they didn't know how to assert their rights under their particular lease agreement. So I think what you do is really, really huge, because again, it's like, what do I do, or how do I do it, or where do I go? And so kind of being that central resource for folks it lifts a pretty huge burden.
One of the other things too, and I'm glad you brought that up about about giving the notice before somebody withholds their rent. One of the other things that we encounter is people are already behind in their rent and then they give the notice.
Right.
And that that's illegal, causes some legal problems for them.
Right.
And so one of the other things is that in addition to actually representing clients, we are a law firm. And so
Right.
we represent clients, we go to court, we do appeals. In certain cases, we do counsel and advice, we negotiate. But one of the other things that we do, which we would love to get into your district and do, is community education and outreach programs.
Okay.
I'm sure you probably have a need for us to come out there in the community and talk
Absolutely.
to.
Absolutely. With the new Tenants Services Office open, their biggest thing is going to be kind of marketing and outreach, letting people know that when they're here and what their services that they're able to do. So as we have different meetings, I'm looking for them and other partners such as yourself to come out and just educate different folks into what their options are. Thinking about the challenges that people in our community have faced, when I look back, sometimes it's either they weren't able to assess services because they didn't know they were there, or they knew the service was there but didn't know how to assess them. And so for me, it's just making sure that people know about the various services available in Orange County, the different community partners, to be able to kind of walk them through those challenges or stand with them through those challenges so that they aren't challenges or they are a little bit more bearable.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And education is sometimes, education and knowledge is power, right?
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's just the education on what are those community resources. Right. I'm going to go ahead and give our phone number.
Okay.
For those watching is 407-841-8310. And that's a number that anybody can call. And we have a live person that will answer our phones and see what kind of legal issue you're having. And if it isn't something that we handle, we're going to get you to resources that can help them.
Do you have like a website, or you have like web services, or?
We do. So our website is www.legalaidocba.org.
Okay.
And that's actually a really great place also for someone to start, because it lists all the areas of law we do, lists how somebody would contact us to get started. We make it really easy for folks. They don't have to take time off work. They don't have to come down to our office. They can call us and we can do what's called the intake application over the phone. If necessary, we can get the lawyer to talk to them over the phone. We will get them through the legal process as much as we can without them having to take time off of work and to be able to do it.
So the phone and the website is the preferred way to reach out. Now, like, what time can we call? Is it Monday through Friday, weekends? What are your hours to be able to call on the phone?
Monday through Friday from 8:30 to, the office is open 8:30 to 5. The phone lines are open Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3:30.
Okay.
But we are also open some Saturdays.
Okay.
And so we have a schedule. If they look on the website, they should be able to see the schedule of which Saturdays that they can call in from 9 to noon.
Okay.
Try to make it easy for working folks to be able to access our services.
That's good. That's good to hear. I like that.
Good. What about the other kinds of areas that I listed that we handle? Do you feel like are you having a lot of issues from veterans, seniors?
So I've seen veterans have issues really just kind of navigating the VA system. Obviously, when you come in, you have the 2 VA hospitals, Lake Nona and Baldwin, and myself being a veteran, I've had challenges where I've had to ask for help, like how do I do this, or how do I apply, or did I fill this out right? And so just kind of navigating that system. I think by and large, people who are veterans and people who aren't, the biggest challenges has been, landlords. Hey, my rent went up $500, $600, $700. Is this legal? Can I do that? Or I'm being evicted, but I paid my rent on time. Can they do that? Things like that. And it goes back to the education. I think knowing your rights is key when you're dealing with any significant situation, especially when it comes to housing or civil matters.
Well, that's excellent then. So let me tell you, our partnership with the VA is, in addition to calling or going to the website, For veterans, we are out at both the Lake Nona and Lake Baldwin sites.
That's good.
A couple of times a month. And again, on our website, we should have that schedule. And veterans can just go out there and walk in on those days, and we will have lawyers on site. The lawyers, if it's an area of law they handle, they can sit right there and talk to them and give advice. If it's not an area of law that the lawyer who's out there that day handles, they will take an application from them and get it down to us so we can look at what that legal issue is.
And when you say application, like what does that entail? I mean, obviously the basic information, but what all, is that like a 10-minute application, 5-minute? What does the application entail?
It entails definitely some basic information about household size, income, contact information, and then depending on the legal area that they need assistance with, we just have some standard questions, basic factual information that we need to know in order to help them best.
So then what are the things that you don't help with?
Oh, we don't do criminal. So if somebody's charged with a crime, we don't do things like personal injury, medical malpractice, things like that.
What about child support? I'm trying to get a modification on my child support. I'm a dad. Is there any help for me there, or?
We can definitely look at, depending on whether or not they're a victim of a crime, and if not, we will be able to find resources for them.
Okay, cool.
Okay? We'd like to take a moment to share a few messages with you and recognize our generous sponsors. We'll be back with more of the Domino Effect after this.
It's the domino effect. It is perpetual goodness. You help one person, you're helping that person's children, that person's parents, that person's loved ones, that person's community, other taxpayers, people they encounter, people they don't encounter. It's continuous. It's never ending.
Hello, welcome back to the Domino Effect. I have Commissioner Michael Scott with me, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into our next topic, property issues, evictions and foreclosures. Commissioner Scott, what concerns are you hearing from your constituents regarding housing?
I think on the eviction side, maybe unjust evictions, people feeling like they were evicted unnecessarily or wrongfully, usually because of like maybe maintenance issues that they didn't know how to properly address. And then I think on the foreclosure side, it's just it's the economy. Some people, their mortgage, depending on the type of mortgage they have the adjustable rates, they go up, they can't afford it, or they have a loss in income or a loss in hours, and just not knowing how to navigate that. And I've heard a lot from homeowners talking about there's a lot for renters and very few things to help homeowners who are going through, similar challenges or the same challenges.
Let's talk real quick about the first thing you mentioned about the unjust or wrongful evictions. I don't know if you have heard this term, but Florida has what we call, what some people call a pay-to-play eviction system. Mm-hmm. And that's really hard for people to understand. What that means, broken down, is once your landlord files an eviction against you and says that the eviction is because you have not paid your rent, the tenant is required to put any unpaid rent and the rent that will continue to accrue during the course of the eviction into the court's bank account, escrow account, called the court registry.
Right.
And a lot of times, I don't know if you hear this, but we hear tenants say, but I can look up through the roof of my rental unit and see the sky. And so when it rains, I have to get out the buckets. Why do I have to put the money in the court registry? And I know that's a really hard thing for people to understand.
So I had a similar situation. In this instance, I was helping a constituent in my district. They had rats and multiple rats, and they had young children. And so their concern was like, hey, we're having to spend money on mouse traps and things like that to kind of mitigate it. It's like, I don't have the money. I think I spent like something like $200 or $300 to be able to get some glue traps to be able to take care of the mice because the apartment complex or whoever their contractor wasn't resolving the issue satisfactorily, eating through their food, bread. It was just, it was really a difficult issue. And they ultimately ended up being evicted, but I just thought about the challenges and how they didn't have the money because they were using the money to fix the issue that the apartment complex wouldn't fix.
Exactly. And it can become sort of a catch-22 that you're using that money to fix the issue that the apartment won't fix, and then you get behind in your rent.
Right.
One of the things that I would say to people in those kinds of situations is you need to talk to a lawyer earlier rather than later. The minute you know you've got a rat in your apartment, call us at Legal Aid.
Right.
If it's somebody out there who is, financially going to be over our guidelines, call a private lawyer. A lot of times we also hear that people will move here from other states and say, but I lived in New York, and in New York this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
Landlord-tenant laws are different state to state.
Right.
And I think we mentioned in our last segment that, education and knowledge is power.
Right.
And with the laws being different state to state, we always tell tenants we would rather see you immediately before you even go out and buy the mouse traps. And so trying to get the word out about some of that. In the situation you talked about, and the tenant ultimately got evicted, that's one of the other things that we like to help people understand is that there is a huge impact to somebody not even once they are evicted, once the landlord files an eviction. Eviction actions are public record in the state of Florida. Anybody can put your name into the system and find out that an eviction was filed against you.
Right.
And so there is this impact where it's going to make it harder for you to rent down the road if an eviction is filed against you. And so that would be one of the other reasons people should come and talk to a lawyer earlier rather than later, because if we can stop that eviction from happening, that's definitely going to be the first priority and the first goal.
Yeah, I think so. I remember the pest control issue. And then something is, when you have kids and kids make poor choices and, you're having to coach them and you're working 2 jobs and sometimes, teenagers do things that teenagers do and how to navigate that where I paid my rent on time, I didn't do anything wrong, my son got in trouble, they have kids too, why can't they understand? And so I think that's reading the lease. Like, hey, what does this mean? What does this section, I don't understand it. And I think, because a lot of times you fill out the lease, you initial, sign here, sign here, and you're not really looking at anything until there's a concern, and now you're wondering what it was that you agreed to, and maybe you might have signed that lease, you might have asked more questions when you moved in.
Yes. And also another good idea is before you sign the lease, get a copy of it if you can and let somebody else help you read it.
Right.
I'm willing to admit in my own personal life, I sign documents all the time and I don't read them. I know I probably shouldn't admit that, but either I don't read them or I might not be exactly sure what I am signing off on. And I think I'll figure it out later. Never a good idea. Don't do what I do.
I think we're all guilty of that from time to time. With so many different, like even just in downloading apps, we're agreeing to, terms of services that are 30, 40, 56 or several more pages than that. But that's where, organizations such as yours come into play to help people kind of fill in those gaps or deficits, that knowledge gaps. Like, hey, did you look at this? Did you know that? Hey, check this first before you do that. And so just having those conversations.
Yes, excellent. One of the other things I want to talk about is we get approached by a lot of tenants, and I don't know if you see this in your district, about, the landlord won't give me a written lease. And in Florida, they're not required to do written leases, but a written lease with a specified term, so a lease that says you have 1 year to live here, you have a lot more protection if you do have a written lease with those specific terms. If you pay your rent, if you have no written lease and you pay your rent monthly, you are what Florida calls a month-to-month tenant. And in certain cases, they don't even have to have a reason. They don't have to have good cause. Your child doesn't have to have committed some crime on the property. They don't have to have a reason. They can just suddenly decide, I no longer want you here. And they do have to give you a written notice in a certain amount of time, but it's not like they have to honor a whole 1-year lease.
Correct. Sometimes those month-to-month circumstances are cheaper as opposed to signing a lease. I've seen instances where it affords a little bit more flexibility. Maybe someone's waiting to close on a house or in some type of transitional situation where they may be going to school or moving away. And so sometimes you'll see where someone signs a month-to-month and the month is cheaper just because the landlord knows that, if they get another opportunity, they could potentially have someone actually sign a 1-year lease for a higher monthly term or rate.
Excellent. And I'm glad you said that because you're right. There are times where a month-to-month lease might be in the tenant's best interest.
Right.
It's probably just best for them to understand and know what are the differences, what are my rights, what are my obligations, what are the pros, what are the cons, right?
Yeah, because even in leases, I've seen instances where if you leave, you're potentially paying 1, 2 months, maybe 3 months penalty just to get out of a lease. So.
Yes. And you know what, going back to our conversation earlier about not reading documents,
Yep.
that's a big one that is usually in a written lease that a lot of people overlook or don't realize that no matter what the reason, if you're leaving that lease early, there is some kind of a penalty, and it can be several months worth of rent. Yeah. One of the other things I wanted to talk about is going back to this notion of my landlord won't fix things. And so if you see that a lot in your district, again, the law on this issue is very complicated. Yes, landlords are required to keep rental units in habitable condition, but the law is very complicated on the issue. So,
Habitable can be subject to interpretation sometimes.
yes, exactly. For instance, I know somebody called me not long ago and said that one of the knobs on a kitchen cabinet broke. That's not going to be considered something that's uninhabitable. Versus I have tenants that call and say every time I turn the sink on, I have raw sewage backing up.
Wow.
That is definitely going to be an issue
Wow.
that a landlord needs to look at and address.
Yeah, I've seen a couple tenants where they didn't have a refrigerator or didn't have a working stove, or in some instances where the landlord charged a fee to replace the stove or replace the refrigerator, and where in previous instances that hadn't happened in other leases with other apartment complexes. And I remember one tenant was sharing with me that they charged for light bulbs. They said that not the traditional light bulbs you screw into a lamp, but like those larger light bulbs and a service fee. So they had to pay a service fee for the maintenance to come out, pay for the labor and the materials.
Thank you, Commissioner. We have another break before we begin our final topic, the very sensitive, critical issues of interacting with law enforcement.
Can health insurance help cure loneliness? Can it take care of your best friend too? Or hold your hand for 9 months? Can it be there for you at 3 a.m.? Or inspire you to go the extra mile? We think so, which is why every day we ask ourselves, what else can health insurance do? Come find out.
I understood his background and where he was coming from, being in the military, and having that background myself. I knew he needed to feel me out and see what kind of guy I was before he was going to trust me to handle his situation. So as I would have in the military, I gave it to him like it is, and then said, now that you know that, let's go see what kind of deal we can make. That's the reward at the end of the day. It's not about money, it's not about prestige, it's about making a difference in somebody's life.
After my 20 years in the military, trusting somebody, like I trust Jay and he take care of me, it's kind of hard for me to trust anybody. He's a good, very good man. Very good man. It's like one of my buddies in the military. I can turn my 6, which is my back, and I know I can trust him. He won't do no harm. He gonna help me out.
A very serious issue that encompasses a multitude of feelings is interacting with law enforcement. I'm joined by Commissioner Scott to discuss pertinent issues affecting residents of Orange County. Thank you for being here, Commissioner Scott.
Thank you.
So tell me, what kinds of questions do you get from your constituents about how and when and why they interact with law enforcement?
Well, more often than not, someone's going to interact with law enforcement probably in the form of a traffic stop, speeding, stop sign, red light, things like that. And so when that happens, just given the nature of the circumstance of that job and their role, sometimes law enforcement is just as nervous as the person they're pulling over. And so when you're pulled over, you want to try to remain calm, try to make sure that your hands are visible, you don't move too much to alarm them in a way where they may think they may feel threatened.
Got ya. There's so many crime shows out there these days, and I think we're used to hearing over and over again the whole, you have the right to remain silent. But I hear that it's, like you said, law enforcement gets nervous, the person being pulled over is nervous, and so everybody's adrenaline starts pumping, right?
So when you talk about like the right to remain silent, we're talking about like Miranda rights, right to remain silent, you have a right to an attorney. You have that right even before they tell you. And I think people think that, oh, they didn't read my rights and things like that, and so that's the education piece where organizations have to come in and kind of let people know how to assert their rights. I always tell my students when I'm working with them and kind of tell them how to govern themselves, don't say, I know my rights. Show it in how you move. Be quiet, ask questions. Just like they're asking questions, you have the right to ask, like, why did you pull me over? Where just telling them that, it is a conversation. I talked to them about a thing in Florida called consensual encounters, and that this is a consensual encounter. You're having a conversation with law enforcement. Have that conversation, but be limited in what you share, knowing that it can be used against you in court.
And that's one of the things I was going to say is, you're right, getting out there and telling, like you're telling your students, and people need to know about these rights. And I really think that we could, we would love to come into your district and do some community education and outreach programs. We can bring some of the attorneys who are knowledgeable in this area to talk about what are your rights, and maybe even do some role playing. Pretend that you're being pulled over by the police so that when it happens, you're not sort of caught off guard.
I think when you say role playing, one, I think it's great. I would love for you to come and do that, probably on a regular basis, if not. But I remember like at military as an example, there's a lot of yelling and screaming. People are telling you, get down, don't move. And sometimes, when someone's yelling, you forget your name. You lose your focus. And so I think the biggest part in dealing with law enforcement is trying to remain calm, trying to be aware of your circumstances, aware of, if you have friends in the car, what they are doing, so that you don't inadvertently alarm them where they may have to draw their weapons or some other escalation.
Right. And that reminds me of when you say that when they're yelling and screaming at you and you're trying to remain calm. I know that sometimes if somebody's yelling and screaming at me, don't look. What is the first thing I do? I look. I do the exact opposite of what they're telling me not to do, right? Yes. So we get a lot of questions. I hear people say, you mentioned about, if law enforcement wants to know my name, do I have to give them my name? Do they have to tell me first why they're talking to me? Or if a traffic stop, why did they pull me over? I have people now who say, anytime I see the police pull someone over, I start videotaping. And, I think, well, you probably need to know the laws on whether or not and when you can videotape somebody are different from state to state. And I always think to myself, well, you probably need to know what those laws are.
Right. Well, Florida law does allow for videotaping law enforcement in the performance of their duties in certain circumstances. Obviously, they're conducting a sensitive investigation. They can tell you to stop recording. But in instances of a traffic stop, they have every right to record themselves because, they're being recorded as well, likely if there's a body-worn camera on that officer. But if you're going to record, I would start recording before the officer gets there, as opposed to when you're fidgeting with their phone. They know what you're doing. You could potentially be calling someone to assist. They don't know. And with law enforcement, you can't assume anything, because if you make the wrong assumption, they could very well cost them their lives.
Right, yes. One of the things I also wanted to mention in this segment is something that I think goes hand in hand with the interaction with law enforcement is if something happens and you are arrested, a lot of times people think that, oh, well, if I'm arrested and it was a wrongful arrest and all charges are later dropped, that's going to go away. That's not on my record.
Right.
And that's not correct in Florida. And so again, being stopped or having an interaction with law enforcement can have a long-term impact on somebody. Yeah.
I've seen instances where people are applying for jobs and maybe there's a withhold of adjudication of guilt, or it's a null prosecute. They didn't prosecute for the charge, but the record is still there. And so when you see someone who's maybe, I was charged with maybe, like, let's say attempted murder or battery, and the charge is dismissed, and it still comes on the background check, then that employer is likely leery to hire that individual, not knowing the circumstances, just knowing that something came up. And so I think that's where, they have to kind of articulate to that employer, the circumstances, probably be a little bit more forthcoming, knowing that that information is there when they apply for the job, so that if it comes up, it's not a surprise to the employer.
Exactly. And again, I think reaching out to someone in the legal field, I think the first priority would be, let's not have that interaction get to the point of arrest if we can, But yes, if it does, let's talk about what is that impact and how can we look and see, is that record eligible to be sealed or expunged? And another thing is, in Florida, somebody can only seal or expunge one record, one Florida record in their in what we call their lifetime.
Right.
And so we don't want folks to think, oh, okay, I already had one sealed, I'll get this next one sealed.
Right. That is kind of unfortunate because you think, you know, predominantly around young people, we all know young people are going to make mistakes, right? They're going to make poor choices. And so let's say 18 years old, maybe you steal something from the store, a belt or something, and then maybe 21, 22, you got your car, you forget to have insurance, and so you maybe get a driving license suspended and something. So you have to determine, okay, which one do I expunge? You know, both of these things will cause issues. Obviously, the theft is a concern if you're working with a job that has you doing anything responsible with money. And then the driving may result in, okay, you can't get this driving job or driving a forklift because my insurance cost for my company is going to go up. And so really, really looking at, you know, kind of how they govern themselves, but also how they talk to law enforcement. What happens when you get in trouble? What do you do?
Right. One of the resources out there that I frequently turn to, the Florida Bar has a pamphlet or brochure on their website, and it's downloadable and printable, and it's called Legal Survival Guide.
Really? Wow.
And it's got some very good information on it about having interactions with law enforcement, having a record, criminal charges, and what to do. It also has some other stuff in there about contracts, what do they mean, and that. But there's some very good information out there in that brochure, definitely on the interaction with law enforcement and what are some of the rights, and then what to do when you're actually facing criminal charges.
I think also there's a lot of confusion when it comes to smoking marijuana, as an example, with us having, you know, the medicinal marijuana, them having marijuana cards. You know, can they search my car? I have a card. I've seen a lot of confusion with, again, young people not knowing there's a traffic stop and they're asking to search the car, but I have a card, how can they search my car? And so kind of articulating the differences between medical marijuana, why they're searching, explaining that, hey, while Florida does allow for it medically, it's still illegal for federal law.
Thank you, Commissioner Scott, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was really a pleasure talking with you and kind of sharing kind of what's going on in my district.
Excellent. It was a pleasure speaking with Commissioner Scott on this episode of The Domino Effect. We appreciate the Commissioner's support of the Legal Aid Society and the Orange County community.
The Legal Aid Society has existed for over 60 years, providing legal representation to clients on issues similar to those discussed in today's episode. It is imperative that the community knows, when faced with legal troubles, you are and should still be able to receive high-quality legal representation and access to justice, regardless of your income. If you reside in Orange County District 6 and have questions about your local laws and regulations, you may contact Commissioner Michael Scott's office by calling 407-836-4420. If you are seeking assistance on a legal matter, you may contact the Legal Aid Society law firm by calling 407-841-8310. The Legal Aid Society is a nonprofit law firm that relies greatly on volunteerism and donations. For more information on how you can help the organization keep its doors open, visit legalaidocba.org today. Thank you for tuning into this episode of The Domino Effect. And remember, perpetual goodness goes a long way. See you next time.